Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, here in Santa Clara, California. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you're watching this next general session at Cloud Expo out there on the World Wide Web. Just to remind you, 9th Cloud Expo, day 2. Still early days yet. We've got 4 days and we're not even through day 2. Duke Scarter joins us next with, I can tell him from my wife that even she has been arrested by the title of this presentation. So that is a first, anyway, in my family. Duke Scarter, CTO of the best company with all the little Softlayer.
That's great, thank you.
Sorry, let me just say that again. Duke Scarter, CTO of Softlayer. Wow.
Look at that.
That was hard.
All right, thank you. Thanks for taking the time out of your afternoon to join me for a couple of words here. We've got a short time together. And in that time, I want to really talk about 2 things. We're going to talk about a new way to think about the cloud. It's really an old way to think about computing. But it's new in the sense that it's different than what a lot of what was discussed in the previous panel, which was a great panel, and a lot of what you read about. And then second, towards the end, we've got an announcement that I'd like to make. So first, I would like to start with a postulate. We talked a lot in the previous panel about cloud washing. And there is definitely a lot of that going on. You know, the sort of concept there is that the word cloud is being labeled on top of everything. Everything from software to hardware, whether it has anything to do with cloud or not, it's a great word, lots of marketing around it, and everyone is putting the word cloud on everything. Including, Softlayer, we have a cloud layer as well. We have several products that have the word cloud in them, so we're certainly not innocent of this. But we do that in a way that is congruent with sort of a public definition of cloud. And my postulate for today is that that definition has really swung a bit too far. The pendulum has swung a bit too far in favor of what I call the public virtualized cloud. There are some other technologies that are old and tried and true that have been tossed to the side a little bit, and I want to bring those back to you a little bit and give you some reasons why you should consider those. The definition that I'm talking about as being public and virtualized is something that is postulated a lot in the media as being the way to think about cloud. There is a lot of internal clouds in enterprises, private clouds, and then there's the public cloud. And there are some things in between. So that's what we're going to talk about. So first, the way we think of cloud at Softlayer is that cloud is not a technology. It's not a particular technology of any particular kind. Cloud is a concept. It's a way to get compute over the internet, so off of your premise, quickly, and you pay for what you use. So it should have a feeling of instant scalability, of infinite scalability, and you should only have to pay for what you use. That's cloud. And that definition will work up and down the typical stack that you hear about a lot, the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. It's all about getting scalable compute over the internet. So that's how we think of cloud. Noticeably absent from that is the word virtualized and is the word, the sort of Amazon, which is a great platform that brought a lot of this to us. But that's not the only way to think about a public cloud. So let me step back just a little bit because there are some notes that I think we can take from the way that we got here that help us understand how we ended up thinking of the cloud so much in one way, while the cloud has such a broad meaning. When you think of public cloud, you really think of a virtualized cloud that you can expand into. And how we got here, I think, is important. So first, the business drivers behind the cloud in the early days, if you go back 10, 12, 15 years, the problem we were originally trying to solve that led to all of this was utilization in our enterprise data centers. We were deploying, for every new product that we came up with, every new project internally, we would deploy 8 or 10 servers just to get a development environment, a test environment, and a UAT environment stood up. And then when you went to production, you deployed yet another set of servers. So you ended up with 10 to 15 physical servers in a data center for every new thing that came on, and that was kind of at a minimum. And then what happened with all those servers is they would sit there, and they were dedicated to that project, and they would run, the dev servers would run about this much, the test servers would run even less, and then spike up during a test event. And then production servers, if you were lucky, they were hitting 10 to 12% of utilization. So originally, what we were trying to solve was utilization in the data center. That increased agility, which you heard a lot about in the previous panel. Brian talked about the cloud really effectively solving that problem for enterprises, is agility. We were looking for costs. Don't know that we've completely lowered costs or that we have made management of those servers that much better, but we certainly began to solve utilization and agility. Another driver early on was mobility. If you go back 10, 12 years ago, the sales force was beginning to move out from behind the enterprise with a laptop. They'd always been out from behind the enterprise doors, but they didn't have a laptop with them. 10, 15 years ago, we were trying to solve order entry platforms that allowed our sales force to enter orders as they were traveling about. This mobility problem. And back then, it wasn't that long ago that you couldn't access corporate resources if you weren't on your intranet, right? You had to either dial in over some horrible 56K line, at a hotel, or you didn't have access at all. So these were early drivers for things that became the cloud. And we ended up with a lot of technological innovations that were catalysts for what we now think of as the cloud. The biggest one, of course, is server virtualization. And that's, that changed the way our data centers worked and evolved into what we think of as a public cloud. CDNs came along maybe 10, 12 years ago, began getting media pushed out to the edge, a lot closer to customers, a lot closer to clients, a lot of application performance improvements came along with that. So a lot of things came along with CDNs. And then most importantly, I think, is the internet itself. The improvement of the speed and the ubiquity of access to it. Pretty much anywhere you go nowadays, you have a great connection to the internet. Surprisingly, that doesn't apply nearly as much in the Bay Area as it does outside the Bay Area, but you can get great internet connections just about anywhere, and that has made it much easier for us to think of moving our compute assets out of our data centers and into some data center that's off over the internet. So this has led to a bunch of new business models. Back in the early days, the first tries at these things were the hosting model, which is really one of the legacies of Softlayer of my company. And ASPs was more or less a failed experience back in the late 90s, trying to get the applications off-site. That failed in large part due to the lack of the internet, the lack of a good, robust internet access. But as that began to improve, the SaaS platforms began to really emerge. Things like Salesforce.com really began to take hold and began to move some of our corporate data off-site. Got us a little bit more comfortable with that. Social media is one of the biggest cultural things that's come along to really help break through and get us comfortable with allowing our data, our corporate data, our compute resources of being off-site. A lot of new business models sprung up from this. So if you think of that as sort of the first big iteration of cloud, and don't get hung up on the 1.0 or the 2009, for the last couple of years, we've had this instantiation of cloud, and it's been very good to us. A lot of innovations have come from that. We just talked about several new business models that sprang up from that. New economics came around with this new version of cloud where you could have your compute cycles off-site. You didn't have to have CapEx. You could get it spun up overnight. So a new startup, whether it's a technology startup or not, you could, overnight, you could have a computer set up off-site, and this led to a fantastic startup boom. Wonderful new creations over the last 5 years. If you look at the number of companies now running incubators, there are incubators constantly. There's one tonight, a huge collection of startups up in San Francisco called San Francisco Beta. These are all over the country, these sort of startup tech meetups. Very, very big boom. So this version of the cloud has been great. And the market the media has really taken hold of it and really talked about it a lot, to the extent that enterprises are really trying to figure out how they leverage a public cloud. All startups try to leverage a public cloud. And somewhere in the back, either in the back or in the foreground of that messaging, is that it's a virtualized cloud. And there is a problem with the cloud that we have today. And that's simply that you tend to find solutions at one end of a spectrum or another. At one end of that is the commodity public cloud. Softlayer offers a product very much like this. It's called our cloud layer. You're all familiar with Amazon. Rackspace has a great product in this line. And there are dozens of companies now that have products like this. Co-location providers now have public clouds available to their customers as well. Very ubiquitous product line. Very inexpensive to get started. That doesn't necessarily equate to inexpensive over time, but it's a very, very small fee to get going. You can get a $20 instance in a lot of these things, $50 instances. You can get started very inexpensively. No commitments. That was a great new creation of the cloud. Previously, you were in for a 1 to 2 to 3 year term contract for a dedicated server. Commodity clouds have really broken through that barrier, and now you can get these inexpensive resources with no commitments. You can start it for a couple hours, a couple days. If you don't like it, you're done. If your product doesn't work after 2 months, you can cancel it. But along with that, you get very limited support, not a lot of transparency. You don't have a lot of control over where your instances run, who's on the box with you, right? So you lose a lot of control. There's some additional risk that you bring on board for the trade-off of inexpensive and no commits. On the other end of the spectrum are enterprise clouds. This is the enterprise grade. Terramarks and Savises of the world have done a great job here. And they've really built a product that helps enterprises get out into a cloud. But the clouds that these guys typically provide are very expensive. You do get a lot of control up front. You can define what's on there. But you end up with a multi-year commitment in most cases. Perhaps millions of dollars a year. So you really lost a lot of the benefits that the other cloud gets, but you get off-site compute. You didn't have the CapEx up front. Difficult to innovate in a world like that. You've got to do a lot of planning up front. So the question is, can you find a middle ground? Is there a way to bridge the gap between these two where you can get a lot of that innovation with no commitments, but have sort of the power and the control of an enterprise class cloud? And that's what I want to talk to you about. So I've got a dirty word, which is a dedicated server. And it was maligned in the previous forum. And that's okay. There is a lot of history that goes along with the dedicated server. It has to do with hosting from back in the day. And there are a lot of problems that have been overcome since then. A lot of things that we've all gotten used to, the way that the virtualized cloud works, that you want to bring whenever you purchase a dedicated server. So 3 different options to think about here. So the first thing, the 4 little things that I want you to consider. One is to remember that you have options. You don't just have to be a slave to a public virtualized cloud. There are other ways to go about this. Dedicated servers are a great option. They are often more suited to the workload, to the problem that you're trying to solve. You get much more control when you go with a dedicated server. And control comes in a couple of different forms. It's not just about having, runtime control and knowing that there are no neighbors on there, although that's a great bit of control. It's also about being able to define up front what you want that server to look like. With a dedicated server, you can define exactly how you want it to be built. If you want a single-use server, heavy on processors and memory, and almost no disk space, you can define it and we'll build it exactly like that. If you want a 4U server with a little bit of processing and lots of onboard SSDs, you just want to stuff it full of drives, we can do that as well. And you can have very high power storage capacity right there. So you can set up the server in the way that you want, and we can do that in a very fast turnaround time. One of the things you have to watch out for, and one of the big complaints with dedicated servers, is that typically it's a long time to deploy. Back not long ago, in fact, still in most cases, you go through a process with a hosting provider where you tell them what you want, and that kicks off a requisition process and a deployment process, and it might take days to weeks before you get your server environment set up. And there are still contracts involved with lots of those. Softlayer, we don't do either of those. We have data centers racked and stacked and ready to go. If you have something really, really particular, if you want a box stuffed with SSDs, we'll have to roll a guy with a screwdriver, but we'll do that within the hour, and we'll still get you the box turned up in a couple hours. The third option in compute is to, if you want a bunch of the benefits of virtualization, the efficiency gains, but you want those efficiency gains to be yours, not mine, then you get a dedicated box and you virtualize it yourself. We'll install on our boxes for you, VMware, Microsoft products. We can install all of the hypervisors on there, and you can take advantage of the hypervisor, of the efficiency gains of a virtualized box. So there's a lot of ways you can go about this, and what we typically talk about with our customers is finding the right combination of these to solve their problem. So when you're building an infrastructure, back in the day when we built all of these things in our own data centers, you would start with a problem set. And that problem set would dictate to you a solution set of software, which then got you to an infrastructure, an architecture that you wanted to deploy. And that architecture was based on characteristics that were very particular to that application, the workload requirements of it. Is it a compute intensive? Is it memory intensive? Is it all about hard drives? What are you doing? How many servers do you need? What kind of configuration do you want? So we take that concept and we look at the servers that we offer, and we end up most of the time with our customers with a combination of dedicated servers and cloud servers. Sometimes the dedicated servers have virtualization on them, sometimes they don't. If you want to run a bunch of databases and you know that you're going to hog the system, very rarely do our customers want a virtualization layer on there, with a little bit of virtualization tax. They don't want that. They just want Hadoop on there directly. They build a whole cluster of them, and they don't have any sort of virtualization on them at all. But if you want that, we can do that as well. And it's that hybrid. It's the infrastructure that meets your needs that you really should be looking for. So it's about optionality, customization, and reliability requirements. The dedicated server, as I mentioned a moment ago, does historically have a functional gap below what a virtualized server has. Some of the things that we all got very accustomed to with the public cloud is infinite scale up, the ability to request more resources on demand seemingly infinitely. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Softlayer, we've got over 80,000 servers. We're coming close to 90,000 servers online. So we've not had a case yet where we haven't been able to meet the compute needs of any of our customers. We turn our servers up in under 2 hours on average. So you can get dedicated servers turned up very quickly. It's not quite 6 minutes. It's not quite 2 minutes like you get in a virtualized cloud. But in most cases, that's more than sufficient when the capital request cycle that we're used to at an enterprise or even at a startup lasts weeks or months. So it's a very quick turn up. We don't have contracts, as I mentioned. And one of the cooler things that we've built that we're in beta on right now is this thing called Flex Image. And a Flex Image brings the ability to do image-based provisioning to your dedicated server as well. So one of the cooler features of a virtualized product is, you've got this virtual image, and since the drivers have been abstracted out, you can take a picture of that server and move it over to other servers quickly, and this is what allows you to do scale up. We brought the same functionality to dedicated servers and allow you to move back and forth between a dedicated server, a physical server, and a virtualized server. So you can start on one and move to the other as the need suits. Pretty cool, very easy clone. It's a great way to reload. It's a great way to back up. All the things you've come to do with virtualized product, you can do now on dedicated line as well. The second big thing that you need to think about is your network. Perhaps even more important to the reliability of your application, maybe more important than the server itself and your neighbors on that server, is the network. There are a lot of points of failure between your customer and your server. And if any one of those network components goes down, if they're not redundant, then your server is inaccessible. So it may be running just fine, but if your customers can't get to it, they think of it as an outage. So you really need to think of the network and the way that the network is built by your provider. Some of the things you need to think about are global networks. Are the data center, if you're deployed into a cloud that's in multiple data centers, are those data centers connected? Do they have a private network between them? Can you move workloads back and forth and data back and forth between your virtual and physical servers over a private network, or you have to tunnel out into the public internet to get from one server to the other? The speed of those interconnections is very important. The redundancy of those interconnections is important. And how much control do you have over that network? So at Softlayer, we have 13 data centers on 3 continents. 2 of our continents just opened up recently. Actually, one of them just yesterday. We opened a brand new data center in Amsterdam yesterday, which gives us our 3rd continent. A month ago, we opened up in Singapore. You can see the network layout up here. Across all of those data centers, we have a private network, 40 gig plus between all of those points, redundant all the way down to the server. I'll show you a server diagram in a moment. Diagram vastly overestimates what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you some circles. But it shows you how those servers are connected into this network. You need, when you deploy a real product, when your business relies on it, you want a network like this backing your servers. So our servers, every dedicated server that we deploy comes with 5 physical NICs on it. 2 of them are devoted to the public internet. So those are physically redundant all the way out to the internet. 2 of them are devoted to our private network. So in all of our data centers, we have 2 physically segregated, 2 physically separate networks. This allows you on the back end to network all of your servers in a physically separate way from the public internet. So if you have servers that are only going to talk to each other, they don't need access to the public, you can turn the public NICs off, and they can still communicate via the private network. As we deploy your servers for you, we automatically install a VLAN on the backside, which you have control of. You can take it down if you want. But you have a lot of control. You manage that. And that private network will span all of those data centers, all of your servers across all of those data centers. And even more cool, it will span into our cloud layer as well. So your virtual instances and your physical instances are all connected via a private network. And we have a 5th NIC that we use for out-of-band management. So if you turn off those public network NICs, you can still get to your server via VPN on the back end through our management network. So 3rd, you want to think about the control plane that you have. How can you manage your servers? How do you manage those instances? You want to have all of the tools that you're used to, but you don't want them to be hit and miss. You want an integrated control plane. So we've got web server or a web portal, lots of mobile apps on all of the major platforms, and a very solid API, 1,800 different calls available in our API. Everything you can do in our web apps and in our web portal, you can do through our API as well. So you want to think about how you can control your servers. And finally, as an industry, this is one that we really need to work on. You heard in the previous forum here how difficult it is to truly burst as an enterprise today. That's something we talk about a lot. We read a lot about that, but we don't have a lot of ability to do that today. So this 4th one, this concept of on-ramps, is an area where our industry, I think, still needs to work. And I hope next year when I'm up here talking, I can talk about some of the cool things that we've done in the bursting scenario, because we've got some really great plans there. But we are still a good ways away from being able to do that. The network, the software just isn't there quite yet. Let me jump to the bottom note here, though. There have been a lot of companies focused on management suites. And this is an area where, if you walk the floor, there are a number of companies that provide management tools today. This is one of the areas where I think we are probably more mature as an industry. And you can think of, in this area, what I'm talking about is when you have servers in your data center, servers offsite, you want to be able to have one management suite that really helps manage that. I'm not going to provide that as a service provider. I'm going to allow you to manage your servers in my data center. We need management suites to manage across data centers and across providers. And I mentioned earlier, we've got an announcement. We announced earlier today, I'm very excited to talk about this, a partnership with RightScale, which is the foremost provider of these sort of management suites. And I'd like to invite up on stage the CEO from RightScale, Michael Crandall, to come say a few words. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Duke. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be partnering with Softlayer. We just announced that this morning, and we're really excited about that. A quick word about RightScale. RightScale really foresaw the need for a layer of software, a layer of management on top of these very powerful cloud infrastructure offerings that we've all seen evolve over the last 5 years, like Softlayer. And especially in 3 areas. One is around automation, is really, because these are API driven, allowing the capability for software to control the infrastructure according to rules and policies. The typical example of that is auto-scaling up and down based on load, but it also has application for failure handling, resiliency, things like that. Second area is around providing a faster on-ramp in terms of pre-built solutions, cloud-ready solutions that are ready to run. And so we developed what we call the multi-cloud marketplace, which is a kind of an app store in the cloud that lets you literally pick a solution, import it. It might be no cost. It might be published by an ISV. But you can then run it in the cloud infrastructure that you want to very quickly and be assured that it's built according to best practices, et cetera. And then finally is governance. Again, it's amazing the kind of power you get from a solution like Softlayer, where you can launch dozens or hundreds or even thousands of virtual machines with the push of a button and also stop them. And then the question arises, who has the power to push that button? And what are the permissions and controls and audit trails around that? So that's the last area that, that RightScale provides. Now, why are we so happy and excited to partner with Softlayer? Well, one is that you guys have been especially innovative, same spirit, I think, that we foresaw in the industry since early days. Second reason is this global set of data centers that Duke just described. Super powerful, and it'll help us get our first presence in continental Europe. Thanks for that.
Right. Yep.
And the networking between those enables a layer of disaster recovery that's really unique out there in the business right now, and that we're very excited about. So just also wanted to say in closing for our part that we have our RightScale user conference co-hosted here with Cloud Expo. It's upstairs tomorrow. Softlayer is a sponsor and an exhibitor, I think, and we'll be participating in that. It's at no charge, so we'd love to have you come up and join the discussion.
Yeah.
And thanks
Fantastic.
very much, Duke.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we're both very excited about this partnership. There's a lot of great things that can happen when we put a great management suite on top of an infrastructure provider like Softlayer. You know, we want to continue to enhance our ability to serve our customers' needs and make it easy for them to work with us. So that's great. We're very excited about it. So I'll summarize here. So there were 4 things. Remember your options. Remember the dirty word, dedicated servers are still a very valid way to go. They don't have to work the way you think of them working 5, 10 years ago, where it took days and weeks to come online. They can be online very quickly. So love the server, give it a hug. It's still a very valid way to go. Consider the network. You want to make sure that you are able to control the network, that you know how the network is built, and that network isn't going to let you down when your customers are trying to hit your servers. Third, look for that control plane. You want to make sure you've got good control of your servers and that it's easy to use and integrated across a number of tools so that it's there when you need it. And finally, look for the on-ramps. So, you know, a combination, dedicated, virtualized, and private cloud is a fantastic way to go. So we're in booth 309 over here. We've got some great people here to talk to you. I'll be over there later this afternoon. Thanks for your time, and please feel free to come by and chat with us.
Thank you so much, Duke Carter. Softlayer, we are now